Hey people, it's your midsole man, Eddbud here. A new release from Puma today, a review of the Foreverun Nitro 2. By the time you view this video, the shoe should be available. This is a stability aimed option from the big cats, though the original version was very usable even if you were a more neutral runner. That one had great grip and became a bit of a favourite for many people out there. How does this new remix hold up? Let's find out. Thanks for tuning in, people. It is always appreciated. Do hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up like. Drop us a comment as well to help with the YouTube algorithm. Dankeschön. So the Puma Foreverun Nitro 2 has been sent over to me for review. In fact, it just sort of arrived without any sort of fanfare whatsoever. But the big cats are not paying me to make this video, nor will they get to vet my views before my valued viewers get to see them. Some stats for you up against the previous version. So you can see here that this new one is actually a little bit heavier, almost by an ounce in fact. Round about the same heel and forefoot stack. Similar drop, a little bit wider there in the forefoot and the heel, and similar durometer readings too. This one's about £140 on retail. I've got about 348 grams here for my UK size 11, US 12, so it's about 12.3 ounces. 44 millimeters in the heel and around about 35 millimeters in the forefoot. Kick off the review with the upper first. So this one is a little bit heavier than the V1. I think that's down to some of the upper materials that have been used here. Puma certainly seem to be pushing the shoe into more of a stability direction. There's a slightly more substantial mesh here to the upper. I think it's probably due to the fabric used. There's a little bit more padding around here in the heel. It's certainly more plush this time round, and there's a much more built up considerable heel counter and this very substantial plastic heel clip that stretches right around the back of the foot. One area though that remains very thin is the tongue. There's not an awful lot of padding here whatsoever. I did find I had a little bit of lace pressure on top of the foot right down at the far end here. Certainly if you're using a runner's knot. So even though they've put these new sort of lace loops in on part of the eye stay, it's still got a little bit of lace pressure there, which was similar in the V1 in fact. Just seems like an odd omission where you've built up some of the materials in other areas of the upper, you've bulked those out but not there. It's kind of strange. Now the materials around the toe box aren't quite as flexible actually as the V1, though I am finding the width is more accommodating for a wider range of feet. It doesn't taper in quite as much as some of those other Puma models in the lateral side of the toe box. And I think the lacing is in fact doing a better job of kind of pulling the upper materials around the foot to create a good lockdown. The shoe appears to me to be orientated around sort of slower to steady effort now. The material's more plush and more comfortable on foot. And I think that's the case really across the whole Puma lineup right now. If I think about the Velocity Nitro 3, the Deviate Nitro 3 too, and the Mag Max along with this one as well, everything's just a bit more trainer-like than it was before. When I think back to the Deviate Nitro original, that was almost like a race shoe really. Perhaps Puma are making a bid to position these into sort of more specific categories, so it's a little easier for people to understand perhaps. But in terms of the upper, this is very much now a stability option. It is quite built up over the V1. So rather than just dabbling in that category, this is an out and out stability shoe. For the upper, it's comfortable enough for me, but a bit bulky. I'll give it a 2.6 out of 3. Midsole. Midsole now. So midsole wise, after my initial runs, it's certainly a cruiser really off an easier pace. One of those shoes, it wants you to engage the whole of that midsole rather than just part of it. The Nitro foam here, certainly forgiving underfoot and very consistent in fact. There's supposed to be a dual layer approach. I think it's like a harder layer or firmer layer on the outside and a softer center. Though don't be confused by what you can see on the outsole here. This is purely just paint by all accounts. There doesn't seem to be any difference between the durometer of the blue and the white layer. This time around there doesn't feel like there's a huge amount of difference between the two Nitro foams. In the last version you could really quite feel that center section. It was much softer. It's certainly a shoe that makes me feel like I want to land in the heel and use that sort of considerable stack. The overlays here cup around the heel far more than they did in the V1. I think the Mag Max does that with foam, where here we've got this sort of plasticky silicone feeling piece, and there's a considerable counter in there as well. So if you do need stability, then this could be a great option for you without it being overtly soft. It's certainly providing some more in-your-face stability over the first version. Now, the insole of the original had a very interesting sort of increase around the arch area to provide a bit of stability. They've got rid of that. It's just a standard foam insole now, but they have included some harder rails that are on the outsole back here in the heel and then from the mid to forefoot, and those really do guide the foot. You can feel that quite a bit underneath. Certainly stabilizes the ride, and you've got something, I guess, that's like a hybrid of the Mag Max and the Velocity Nitro 3. So if those shoes work for you, then you might really like this one. I'm not finding the Foreverun Nitro 2 as hard on my knees and my hips as the Mag Max. That was just a little bit too soft for me. Just a bit too much shoe. That lacked consistency over the footbed, whereas the Foreverun Nitro 2 has that in spades. It's not perhaps the most exciting or wild ride, but I don't think that's really the intention of the shoe. It kind of does what it says on the tin, really. I think perhaps if you're a slightly heavier built runner, you might get a bit more out of this one than me, but I can see it working out for people doing some longer runs. Perhaps if you're marathon training, throwing in some exceptionally longer efforts, or even some recovery stuff, and you just want a little bit of extra support, then the Foreverun Nitro 2 could work out really well. Actually worked quite well doing some 1 minute reps at like 5k pace. Felt surprisingly good. I don't think I've ever said that about a stability orientated shoe before. I'll give it a 2.7 out of 3 for the midsole. As a daily sort of training option, I think it's spot on. It's got a good level of response there. It's not too soft. I think it could work out very well. Now, the big issue I had with the outsole of the V1 was those big cutouts in the foam. You got loads of debris caught up in there, and some of the lugs just got built up with dirt and grime very quickly. The lugs here are a little bit more like those found on the Mag Max, so if that's a shoe that worked for you in terms of outsole, then this could be great. They're certainly not the easiest to clean though. Hard bristle brush and a lot of elbow grease is the way to get there, but it's not really a deal breaker. It's quite sort of sticky rubber, I suppose, and I found the more I've used it, actually that sort of outer layer is starting to disappear and it gets better. Works pretty well on pretty much any surface I've tried it on thus far. Do seem a little tougher this time out in this generation of Puma shoes, though hard wearing rubber isn't always what it seems. I mean, look at the Adios 9 and the Adios Pro 4. That stuff is absolutely insane, and it's super thin, just never seems to break down. Puma going for a thicker approach here. The lugs are actually quite deep. I mean, it's a road orientated shoe. I don't really see anybody taking this on the trails, and it's not an out and out racer, so the amount of rubber here is probably appropriate for the intended purpose. So one interesting area that is different over the V1 is those guide rails. I measured those in terms of shore durometer softness, and I got about 80, which is very, very tough. It's almost like they're using them as a sort of outer layer plate. It really does provide some rigidity there and does guide the foot strike. A nice smooth transition really from heel to toe. Nice rolling action, and that's what the shoe wants you to do. Landing forefoot is a little bit harsh due to those rails, and it's certainly a shoe from the midsole and outsole perspective that likes to control sort of how you're running it. Again, there's lots of nooks and crannies here that are going to get built up with dirt and debris, but there's loads of rubber there to provide you with some grip and good surface area too. Though, is there almost too much? I'll give it a 2.6 out of 3 for the outsole so far. Won't be for everybody. Value-wise, these are set to release on the 6th of February. I think there are 140 Earth credits here in the UK. Could be a great option for those after a daily driver, if you want something that's got a little bit of comfort, a little bit of stability, something that's a little plush on foot. The weight, though, perhaps is going to put people off, you know, an ounce heavier than the V1. That's quite a considerable increase. Though for training, does it really matter? I'll let you decide that. I'm going to sit on the fence here a little bit. I mean, sometimes like a nimbler shoe helps you get out there on those mornings, perhaps where you really don't quite feel like it, where it's wet, windy and cold. Like, gets you out the door. You know, if you're marathon training, any small incentive is obviously very welcome, and that might actually play against this shoe a little bit. I think for the heavier built runners, again, you might get a bit more out of this one than me with my stick thin frame. There's a slightly wider base across the forefoot area, though perhaps the upper is a little bit more nuanced than we had in the V1. Shoes finish is pretty good out the box with most Puma shoes, though I've noticed one very odd thing. Just show you here where the rubber meets the midsole. You can see there's like a little gap there between the foam and the rubber where it's kind of not connected. I've already got like some stones and grit like in there. And of course that's an area that's going to take a bit of a pounding. I can see that being a bit of a problem perhaps in the future. So I don't know if it's supposed to be like that. I mean, there's a channel cut out of the midsole there. So yeah, it's a really odd design feature that. I haven't got any glue marks or sort of seepage there anywhere. The upper's certainly very well fitted to the midsole. Just a bit perplexed by this part here. At 140 notes, I think that's a pretty decent stability option. I'll give it a 2.7 out of 3 for value. If I've totaled the scores out correctly for the Foreverun Nitro 2 after my initial runs, it's a 10.6 out of 12. So small incremental changes there over the V1, perhaps a slightly more suitable outsole, better lockdown and a slightly wider foot shape and more consistent cushion across the footbed. Though the thin tongue and the quite rigid outsole are going to mean that this is one that's not for everyone. Let me know your thoughts and opinions on this one and Puma's Nitro series down in the comments. Quick musical interlude for you. It's absolutely freezing today outside. I've just put out like the bins and the recycling boxes. The whole of the pavement's just, really slippery, covered in frost. To make myself feel a bit warmer, I always opt for a particular album from Elvis Presley, Blue Hawaii. The title track just warms you up straight away. The beautiful, subtle, gentle vibes about the tracks on this album. Moonlight Swim as well as a particularly good track to get you in that sort of mood. The beautiful steel guitar and ukuleles there. They just almost sort of stroke your head and calm you down. And Elvis's wonderful vocal performances across all the tracks are so warm. It's like you're sat by the fire. Go and check it out, guys. I think you'll really enjoy this one. The original soundtrack from Blue Hawaii from the King, Elvis Presley. Thanks for tuning in, people. I hope you enjoyed today's new Puma shoe review. Hit that subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, like, and drop us a comment too. My name's Eddbud, and I'll be seeing you